I wonder what Dominic Grieve thinks about that, former Attorney General. Hello to you, Mr. Grieve. Thanks for joining us on the programme this morning. What should happen to Mr. Johnson?
Well, Mr. Johnson's explanations have got to be considered by the committee. And they've got to do that in an impartial way, and I'm quite sure they're capable of doing it. They're a cross-party committee, and they've got to consider whether, in fact, the statements he made to the House of Commons were untrue. Mr. Johnson certainly does appear to have a considerable problem. He attended some of the gatherings which were parties, and yet he said that there weren't any gatherings. And it's a bit difficult, therefore, to understand how he didn't know that there had been parties going on at number 10 Downing Street. He says they're work events. Well, the photograph you're just showing rather shows for itself the nature of the gatherings which were taking place. They don't look like work events. So Mr. Johnson's got a lot of explaining to do. And of course, that is against the background of somebody who has a serial reputation for telling untruths whenever it suits him.
Well, he says that he has a 50-page written document that he's going to submit today. His lawyers have been working with him, and he will be able to prove that he did not mislead Parliament. Is there a difference between misleading Parliament and an intention to mislead Parliament?
It's possible for a minister or indeed a member of the House of Commons to inadvertently mislead Parliament. And if you do that, you should correct the inadvertent mistake you made at the earliest opportunity. It has been quite notable with Mr. Johnson that he and his ministers have often misled Parliament on other matters and never corrected the record. But this is a particularly serious matter because it went right to the heart of his government. But yes, it is possible that the committee could conclude that although he misled the House of Commons, he didn't do it on purpose and that he was himself of the view that there weren't parties taking place at number 10 Downing Street. But as I say, the photographs will seem to me to demand some explanation as to how he could make those assertions when he was both attending events of the kind that you can see in the photographs, and on top of that, there are some internal emails in which he states this is the most unsocially distanced gathering that has taken place. So on the face of it, he seems to have known that there were gatherings which were taking place, which appear to have been in breach of the lockdown rules.
You are no fan of Boris Johnson, it has to be said. You've said he wasn't suitable to be Prime Minister and that he was taking the country down a dangerous path. A lot of your colleagues don't necessarily agree. He is still incredibly popular with the Conservative Party, and the growing view is that it would take somebody of his character to try to lead the Conservatives going forward if you lose the next election.
Well, I'm afraid that just shows that elements of the Conservative Party are still delusional about Mr. Johnson. And if they want to continue along that path, it's a matter for them. But Mr. Johnson is not going to help the Conservative Party's electoral fortunes. As for his future, I've no idea. The committee has got to act impartially. And as Parliament is not subject to any higher authority, because we have this thing called parliamentary sovereignty, and there's a privilege of Parliament, so no court can investigate what goes on there, it is self-regulating. So Mr. Johnson, I'm afraid, can't complain about the fact that it is going to be a group of MPs who are going to consider the material on Wednesday and listen to what he has to say. And they will have to do their best to set aside all personal prejudices and just look rationally at what Mr. Johnson says when he says that he didn't mislead Parliament, and look at the evidence, and they've got to come to a fair conclusion. And I'm quite sure that they're capable of doing that.
You mentioned the Privileges Committee. The chairman recused himself, stepped back because he had previously criticised the then Prime Minister, Chris Bryant, of course. It is majority Conservative, 4-3 of those who are on the committee. I want to ask you about Sue Gray, if I may, and the fact that she was apparently advising the committee while she was speaking to the opposition about a new post working for Sir Keir Starmer. Perception is not good there, is it?
I think that Sue Gray made, I find it difficult to say an error. Let's take it two ways. Is it wrong for a former civil servant to go and work for a political party? No, it is not. And do I think that Sue Gray is, as a consequence of doing this shift, in some way tainted in her approach to being a civil servant in the years before? And I have to say, having known her for many years, when she's been a civil servant over the last 10 years or more, I'm absolutely satisfied about her impartiality and independence on every subject. So from that point of view, the shift that she has decided to make to becoming Keir Starmer's chief of staff is one which, in my view, is perfectly acceptable. The timing, one has to say, did come across as rather unfortunate in all the circumstances, but that's a matter of presentation. I don't happen to think that Sue Gray is in any way biased, or that her bias it was present at all when she was a civil servant in Downing Street and Whitehall.
I understand that, Mr. Grieve, but perception is reality, and she put together a report which eventually brought down the then Prime Minister. She was advising a committee which is looking into the actions of the then Prime Minister, and is at the same time talking to the opposition.
But the time she did her report, I'm not aware that at that stage she was talking to Keir Starmer about becoming his chief of staff at all.
No, but
I don't think there's any evidence of that whatsoever.
But she was when she was talking to the committee.
Well, she may have been when she was talking to the committee, but she wasn't when she did her report. And ultimately, it's her report which certainly helped bring the Prime Minister down. But you only have to look at the content of the report to see it would be very difficult for the report to say anything else, because it was backed up by a huge amount of evidence.
Quick thought before I let you go on the situation as far as the Home Secretary is concerned and Rwanda. What do you see happening? She says that she'll be sending people to Rwanda by the summer.
I shall wait with interest to see how many people actually get sent to Rwanda by the Home Secretary. I think it's a policy which is fraught with difficulty, and it will be interesting to see whether this policy actually works or not.
It's always great to see you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you.